The following is a DW Ancient Egypt production. The reign of Pharaoh Unas, from 2375 to 2345 BC, was a time of change in ancient Egyptian religion and in the ideology of kingship. This involved the lessening of the power of the kingship in conjunction with that of the administration and the priesthood. Meanwhile, the cult of Osiris was becoming more important, with this god replacing the king as the guarantor of life after death for the pharaoh's subjects. For an Egyptian of the time, as quoted from the German Egyptologist Hartwig Altemuller, the afterlife no longer depended on the relationship between the individual mortal and the king. Instead, it was linked to his ethical position in direct relation to Osiris. In contrast, the cult of the sun god Ra was in apparent decline, even though Ra was still the most important deity of the Egyptian pantheon. The pyramid texts found in Unas's pyramid demonstrate the importance of Osiris as almost an equal to Ra in ancient Egyptian religion at the time. Both gods were believed to play the key roles in assessing the afterlife, with Ra as the source of life and Osiris as the force through which the next life would be attained. Little is known of Unas's activities during his reign, which was a time of economic decline. Egypt maintained trade relations with the Levantine coast and Nubia, and military action may have taken place in southern Canaan. With Unas, however, we find decorated burial chambers inside the pyramid for the first time. The Pyramid of Unas was excavated by Gaston Maspero in 1881. The carved reliefs on the walls inside revealed scenes of hunting, sailing, and desert life. This artwork was not unlike those found on the mastaba tombs of the nobles, who had been doing this for quite some time. Created in North Saqqara, between the Pyramid of Sekhemket and the southwestern corner of the pyramid complex of Djoser, Unas had workers level and cover older tombs in the area in order to complete his pyramid. The Pyramid of Unas is the smallest of the pyramids completed during the Old Kingdom, having a square base of only 189 feet by 189 feet at 141 feet high. The Pyramid of Unas was part of a larger mortuary complex built around it. It was approached via an ancient lake on the shores of which Unas's Valley Temple was located. This temple received the provisions for the cult of the king, and the offerings to be made were prepared there. At the back of the Valley Temple was the beginning of a 700-meter causeway, equaled only to that of Khufu, and leading to an upper temple adjacent to the pyramid. A thin slit in the roof of the causeway allowed light to illuminate its walls, which were carved, for their entire length, in painted reliefs. These depicted the Egyptian seasons, processions of people from the nomes of Egypt, craftsmen at work, offering bearers, battle scenes, and the transport of granite columns for the construction of the pyramid complex. At the end of the causeway was a large hall leading to a pillared open court surrounded by magazine chambers. The court led into the mortuary temple proper, which housed statues of the king and were where the offerings to the deceased took place. At the southeast corner of the enclosure was a small satellite pyramid for the Ka of the king. As mentioned, the Ka was basically the soul of the king. The most important discovery was the pyramid texts. These comprised of 228 spells designated to ensure that the pharaoh completed his journey to the next world, some of which may have been recited during the burial ceremony. Unas's pyramid was the first to feature such texts, but the tradition was quickly established to become the norm in the next dynasty. No complete series exists in any of the pyramids, but a total of 400 have been compiled from the Pyramid of Unas and his 6th dynasty successors. These texts will eventually evolve into the coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom, and later into the famous Book of the Dead during the New Kingdom. The burial chamber housed nothing but a black basalt sarcophagus sunk into the floor and a canopic chest. The sarcophagus proved to contain scattered bones, but whether these belonged to Unas is uncertain. The pyramid texts were intended to protect the body of the pharaoh in 3 different stages as it laid in the burial chamber. First, the spells were written to make sure the body of the pharaoh remained undisturbed in its sarcophagus until it was ready to travel. The second set of spells were for when the pharaoh traveled across the sky to the west. This would take place in a solar barge, and these spells were to make sure that the journey was safe and without trouble. The third and final set of spells was to make sure the pharaoh would be accepted into the next world. These spells combined the ideologies of Osiris and Ra, which were both seen as forces of rebirth. During the day, the sun, identified with Horus, traveled through the sky as the source of all life. At night, it merged with Osiris in the netherworld to be reborn at daybreak. The pyramid texts guided the king to his place alongside the sun. The west was always associated with the dead, probably because the sun dies every day in the west and rises again in the east. For this reason, the Egyptians almost always lived on the east bank and buried their dead on the west bank of the Nile. All the Egyptian tombs are located on the west side of the Nile, which is considered the land of the dead. The god of the dead, Osiris, is called the Lord of the West. Egyptologist Bob Breyer states, "Like our dearly departed, the Egyptians would say that they went west. They called the dead Westerners." The funerary cult of Unas continued until the end of the Old Kingdom and may have survived during the chaotic First Intermediate period. The cult was still in existence or revived during the later Middle Kingdom, from 2055 to 1650 BC. This did not prevent Amenemhet I and Senusret I from partially dismantling the mortuary complex of Unas for its materials. In parallel to the official cult, Unas may have received proper veneration as a local god of the Saqqara necropolis until the late period. From 712 to 332 BC, nearly 2,000 years after his death, his statues have never been found. The 5th dynasty ends with the death of King Unas, who leaves no heir, and a short period of political instability occurs until the rise of King Teti and the 6th dynasty. Thank you for joining us.
This Oxford history of ancient Egypt takes you from the Neolithic period to its conquest by the Roman Empire. Written by 13 leading scholars in the world of Egyptology and edited by the leading author, Dr. Ian Shaw, this publication is the only single work to cover 700,000 years of ancient Egyptian history.